So welcome. Well, you know that we are seeing an international exhibition on the subject of broken nature, and we are really honored to have here with us today David Lowry, who is a David Rockefeller Director of Museum of Modern Art, New York, together with Paola. Paola is a Senior Curator of MoMA's Department of Architecture and Design, and as you know, the Curator of the Broken Nature exhibition. So I think we had an amazing opportunity today to talk about the role of culture and arts institution in a global world, and also how the extension and all the project of extension of the capacity of the cultural institution to broadcast their program could play a crucial role also in the, let me say, political dynamics of a city like New York or Milano. And let me say also in the relation that a city like New York and Milano could have in an international network of cities and in relation with their specific country where they are hosted. So I think that what we are trying to do as Triennale in order to establish networks with other cultural institutions in Europe and in other parts of the world, it's really something which could become extremely important in the next future. And for us, let me say, Museum of Modern Art New York, MoMA, is a model, is a reference. So I'd love to give the floor to Deb just to start to talk about what he's doing, what you are doing, and then I think with Paola we start to comment your words. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Stefano. Let me begin by saying the obvious. I am so proud to be here with Paola Antonelli, one of our brilliant curators, to be able to say in Milano, her home, how incredible I think her work is, and how deeply moving Broken Nature is, and how successful it is in sparking our imagination about one of the most central issues of our time. So Paola, I just hope you know from my heart
Thank you.
what an honor it is to be here with you home, or at least your second home now, and with Stefano, who's a great colleague, to celebrate this absolutely riveting Triennale. So Broken Nature asks us, in a way, to think about a simple issue. How have we, on this planet, as humans, affected the many different ecological systems that surround us and that are essential to us? And how has the fragility of those systems now changed the way we understand the world? And what is it that we as humans can do to mediate with the crises that have occurred, some of which would have occurred anyway, and some of which we have accelerated because we haven't thought through the complex relationship between humans and other species. And if you think about that question, you can also imagine how museums, especially museums of modern art, are constantly asking themselves, how can they, as institutions in a larger ecological and ecosystem of other cultural institutions, think about the critical issues of our time? And we are now 90 years old at the Museum of Modern Art, and we are undergoing an enormous reconsideration of our role, of our collection, of our responsibilities, in a way responding to a kind of parallel set of issues that are raised here in Broken Nature. So if the Museum of Modern Art, over the course of its 90 years, was understood to be a canonical institution, a place you came to see modern art as it was supposed to be understood. If you believe that myth, and it was a myth, we propagated it successfully for a long period of time until we realized that actually modern art, by which I mean modern and contemporary art, It's far more complicated than that, and it always was more complicated than that. That there were always artists working around the world, not just in Europe and North America, who were doing extraordinary work, every bit as important as artists working in Paris or New York or Berlin or Rome or Milan. And that there were communities of artists that had not come to the foreground because of their race, their gender, their location, that needed to be taken into account. That the ecological system of the art world was actually far more interesting when one understood it at a granular level. So if you think that one has to be sensitive to that, and those are the issues of our time, how to realize the richness of artistic practices now taking place, and how to reflect that both backwards and forwards, you really quickly come to a recognition that a place like the Museum of Modern Art needed to change, needed to evolve, needed to respond to the critical issues of our time. So the current project that will be completed in October 21st, endeavors to create a new platform for the museum by trying to achieve 3 large architectural goals and several important intellectual goals. The architectural goals are to create more and different kinds of space to better show our collection and better reflect the breadth of artistic activity today. To also intervene in existing space to make it more comfortable, more gracious, more intuitive for our various visitors so that they can move around the building in a more fluid and easy way. And third, to connect the museum to the energy and reality of Midtown Manhattan. So this just gives you a kind of rendering of the museum, moving from right to left. On the right side, you see our entrance. It's actually the same entrance as we currently have, but a new canopy has been put in it to layer it down, to scale it to the size of human beings, to recognize that this massive portal was in a way daunting, but one gesture of a portico reorients it to the human, then moving to the right, or actually to your left along the way, you continue down the Taniguchi building, which was designed in 2004, until you get to this sliver, which is a new stair and elevator and new system of circulating up and down the building. And then adjacent to that is a new suite of galleries. It includes a studio for performance, a gallery for contemporary design that Paola, as soon as we get her back from Milan, I hope will be working on. But that gallery is open to the street, so you see it before you even enter the museum. And then the last building is actually a tower designed by Jean Nouvel, but we have the lower 6 floors in that. So we increased the amount of space we have for our collection by about 30%, from about 12,000 meters to 17,000 meters. But more importantly, we introduced these new kinds of galleries, like the Studio for Performance, which is an acoustically tuned space in the heart of the sweep of our galleries, like a projects gallery where we can show new, young, emerging artists, and galleries designed to face the street. And this gives you a bit of a cutaway, a kind of X-ray of what the building looks like. So to make room for a new ground floor lobby, we had to sink our store down a level, but we created a double height space so that it's full of light. Then you see the new system of stairs, and we call that stair a blade stair because it literally floats in space. It's not suspended or connected to the walls. It hangs off a central shaft. Then the new suite of galleries on the ground floor, Paola's contemporary design space. The next floor up is a double height open gallery for sculpture, and above that, the studio, and then to the left, the new galleries in the tower. All of these galleries open up onto the street, which means as you're coming along 53rd Street, you look into the museum, you see what's happening. And if you're in the museum, you can also look out onto the street and engage with what's taking place in Midtown. Now, that's the architecture, designed by Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro, and we're really excited about it. But the architecture is a platform or a frame for what we want to achieve. What we want to achieve is, first of all, to turn our collection from being a permanent collection, that is the idea that what we present never changes, to a work in progress, that is a collection that's always changing, that recognizes that modern and contemporary art is evolving, changing, responding to crucial and critical issues of today, that we are always acquiring new works of art and selling works of art we are no longer committed to, and that we want to reflect that energy in the galleries. And we also want to bring all the different disciplines that we collect, painting, sculpture, architecture, design, film, media, photography, drawings, prints, together. Because the way we displayed them in the past was they were each displayed in different sections of the museum, as if they had no relationship to each other. But we know, in fact, just walk through Paola's beautiful exhibition. Artists and designers think together. And people who are interested in photography are committed to film, and people interested in film are interested in architecture, and people interested in architecture are interested in painting, sculpture, and drawing. And so instead of keeping all of these media separate from each other, we want to weave them together into a complex tapestry, while at the same time providing space for individual moments when you might dive deep into design, or deep into film, or deep into photography. And in this way, we want to reflect the vitality of contemporary art. Because when we were founded in 1929, Alfred Barr, our founding director, believed that the Museum of Modern Art's role was to make evident all of the different forms of modern art as they are expressed, which is why we started collecting design very early on, and photography very early on, and film very early on, because they were the new modes of visual expression at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. So if we do this right, the museum will simultaneously feel rewarding for those who come and want to see the familiar, and it will also feel startling for those who are surprised. This gives you a sense of the circuit through the museum, a kind of slice where you can see the studio with its raked seating, above the studio a new terrace cafe looking out onto the street, and then the way in which the floor plates connect laterally across the museum. So the new architecture is a direct extension of the existing architecture, so you can flow smoothly between the old and the new parts of the museum. And as you do that, you'll also enter through this gracious lobby that's open and airy, whereas our current lobby has a low ceiling and feels tight and compressed. You'll be able to look up into the galleries immediately as you enter, so you know where you're going, but also when you're in the galleries, you'll be able to look back down. And earlier today, I was talking to a journalist who said, but what about the crowding? You're very crowded. And so one of our goals is to disperse that crowding. We've moved the ticketing area deep into the lobby so it doesn't block the entrance. We've created multiple entrances so you can come in from different locations and navigate through the museum more fluidly. But we've done all of that for one reason: to engage our public better with the great works of art they come to see, like Starry Night. And of course, those works of art will be on view, but they'll be on view in a new context. And they'll be on view in galleries that change all the time. So even if the iconic works of the museum, like Starry Night, or the Demoiselle d'Avignon, or Matisse's Dance, or Andy Warhol's Soup Cans, will always be present, they won't always be present in the same place, and they won't always be present with the same surrounding works of art. And that's part of converting the collection from being permanent as an idea to being a work in progress. So every 6 months, we'll change 30% of what's on display, so that at the end of a year and a half or two, 100% of our galleries will have changed. And I'm talking only about our collection galleries because, of course, we'll be running important temporary exhibitions throughout this time as well. And we want to make the experience of visiting the collection as exciting as the experience of visiting a temporary exhibition. And if we do this well, those who come to see the iconic works like Starry Night will also discover works of art they didn't know about that will feel fresh and surprising, like Emrinlani Mukherjee's figure that is one of the great works of our collection from the subcontinent, but only recently added as we endeavor to reflect the vitality of artistic practices in places like the Middle East or India or China or Africa that have previously been largely absent. And this project of changing the galleries and introducing new voices is also a project of ensuring that what's on display reflects all of the different practices that are in our reserves, because our reserves have always been more complicated, more rich, more varied than what has been on display. And we're trying to make the delta, the difference between the two, stop and become one and the same. And of course, film will be introduced at the moment you enter the gallery. So if you think about the idea that we start with post-impressionist paintings like Starry Night, the next thing you'll see is not Picasso and early Cubism, but you'll see what Van Gogh was looking at, which was film and photography, lens-based art. And that interruption, that surprise, will open up the possibility that maybe the advent of Cubism is in part a reaction to the visual culture that Braque and Picasso lived in. That it didn't just happen because they were thinking about Cézanne. It happened because they were also thinking about these new technologies and how they shaped and reframed their understanding of time and space. And of course, embedded in all of this lies our commitment to architecture, one of the first departments created at the Museum of Modern Art. And we're deeply grateful to our friends at Allianz because we are partners in many ways, Stefano. We share Paola. We have joint custody for a while of Paola, but we also share the great support that we've received from Allianz in helping us with our architecture and design galleries. And we are lucky enough to have these fantastic works like this fragment of the UN facade, which at the time represented the cutting edge of modular technology, where you could build a curtain wall that was pre-assembled outside the building and then attached to it. These will be an integral part of the experience of moving through the museum. And if you look at that curtain wall and you think about when it was made in 1952, you can also think about the ways in which minimalism and post-minimalism respond to different notions of the grid and of prefabrication. Or you can think of how these architects and engineers who designed this were aware of the way in which Mondrian split the grid of a painting. And it isn't to say one influenced the other, it's to say that they share common interests in understanding the way form and space can be structured. And if you enter our pop galleries, our galleries devoted to Warhol and Rosenquist in the 1960s, you'll see those great works, but you'll also be surprised by works like this by Hervé Telemaque, made at exactly the same moment, and yet with a very different sensibility, with a very different challenge to the idea of consumer culture. And so we want to be a rich tapestry that recognizes that as the world changes around us, as we understand new geographies, new forms of artistic expression, as we come to grips with all of the different forms of artistic expression that we haven't previously been able to foreground in the museum, that we can be a platform for these possibilities, that we can share as this great project here in Milan, Broken Nature, shares an idea that we as humans can intervene in the space in which we exist constructively, and that we can change, and that as we can change our understanding of the art and culture around us. So thank you, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you.
So I think you have the role who has, in a certain way, explored the Triennale space in the last months. And at the same time, I think you really can compare your long experience, MoMA, and what we have done here. So I'd love to hear from you. What's for you could happen thinking to the future of exhibition space if, for instance, this mythology of white boxes is still something that matters when we have to design a space for visual art or for design exhibition, or not. So also, in a way, observing what Glenn has showed us now. And also, it's how the MoMA extension is or not trying to change this, let me say, what box approach to visual art.
It should not be either or, but rather and. You know, MoMA is one museum, one of the greatest museums, of course, in a network that is international and that is global, of different places. You know, what is important is for museums to be places, whether they are places that are in a white box or places that are in a park or places that are on a train. Still, they are locations where people can change gears. That's how I always thought of museums. If you are in a frenetic city like New York, a museum is a place where you go down one gear, you know, one lower. And instead, if you are in a small country village, all of a sudden it gets your blood flying faster. So I think that, and I'm hoping that there will be many museums of many different kinds. And at MoMA, we've been thinking of how to also go beyond the white box. And of course, we have MoMA PS1 that helps us a lot break that mold, and much more. And we've been using online and digital in order to get to more. But, you know, if you're seeing in the slides around us, you know, there are different ways to be political, and there are different ways to get into the world like gas. So I want to give a shout out here to not only to my colleagues at MoMA, to Stephanie Stakias, but also to Erika Petrillo and to Lucrezia. I can't remember Lucrezia's last name. Lucrezia Di Marco, who put together these two shows that compare or juxtapose the Triennale and MoMA in their more political moments. Political doesn't mean only the occupational. It also means showing different and new forms of art that people have never seen before that get your mind really thinking. So the white box is still a tyranny in some cases, but it's also a wonderful resource. And it fits well in a system that is instead much more articulated and much more open.
Okay, so you were saying that in a certain way, the idea of a museum like a bricolage of different spaces or an addition of different places could have the white box approach as one of the many possible ways to deal with
or many different museums, and some are white boxes and other instead. I mean, I remember the first exhibition I ever did at MoMA was called Mutant Materials in Contemporary Design, and it traveled to the Groningen Museum. Oh my God, talk about the opposite of a white box. It was just insanely difficult to install in a Coop Himmelblau space where nothing had any straight angle, but it was also exciting.
Gaetano Pesce did the cover of the catalog, I remember.
Yes, sir.
It was
yes,
an extremely complicated catalog to publish. It was my first project at the museum. We started at almost the same time. I went, oh my God, this is going to be such a difficult job. But it was also a fantastic project and a beautiful catalog. But I don't believe in the tyranny of the white box. I think
It's
that
really interesting.
I think that there was a moment when everybody in the 70s and 80s believed somehow that you needed this white box in order to show contemporary art in optimal conditions. But in fact, it had been shown in completely different conditions previously, and artists themselves were never satisfied with that white box. And maybe museums were slow to react. So yes, if you go to a museum, I think you want an array of galleries that allow a variety of different kinds of installations and projects to take place. And I know architects certainly don't want to only design white boxes, and sometimes they push us a little bit to be uncomfortable so that we can think about the different kinds of spaces in which art wants to be.
At the same time, I think that, just to give a very, very banal example, but Gary, Bilbao, Guggenheim, it's in a way it's the opposite. So, and we had quite a long period in the recent past where several new museum spaces were inspired by this idea that architecture could condition the way you are exposing art. So that's over now for you, or still a possible way to?
It's a good point. You know, I don't know what the future of museums will be. This is probably something you've been reflecting on much more than I have. Will it be about building new buildings all the time, or will it be about reusing buildings that already exist?
I have no idea what the future
Yeah,
of music. That's why we turn to Stefano. But
We can talk about the past. You see there, that's the opening of, this is the opening of Triennale 33, sorry, and this is Lucio Fontana, Marini. So it's exactly what we're saying about how architecture could, in a very, very delicate way, condition the space for sculpture and visual art. So that's in a way amazing.
well, I think architecture, of course, conditions how we see and respond to art, but I don't think there's only one way. Right? I think it's and maybe there are moments when you live with a kind of absolute truth about something, and other moments when we're skeptical about truth. And we are definitely in a moment of skepticism, and I think that's true for architects, it's true for artists, it's true for curators, it's certainly true for museum directors. So we're wary of the dogma of only one approach being correct or appropriate. And actually, we're eager to embrace not only multiple approaches, but even at times contradictory approaches, because we know we live in this contradictory world. And so how does architecture enable those contradictions to surface in the display of a collection? And how do you display a collection so that the different competing positions of artists at any one time can surface? And so for me, architecture is a frame, and it's not the end of the story. In a way, it's the catalyst.
Self-referential.
At least not within a museum. So, you know, we live in a time, and Broken Nature addresses this, of acute ecological awareness. It may well be that the notion of expanding and building more becomes anathema to a new generation that would rather repurpose the existing than build more, and is more concerned about diminishing the use of resources than increasing the use of resources. And if that occurs, it'll be a fascinating departure, and we'll look at how existing institutions are reconditioned to meet a new set of values.
Yes, so I think there are two issues. One is about how to display collection, which I think is a very, very delicate point. I don't know if Jose is here with us, but what we have tried to do, what Jose tried to do with our design collection on the ground floor, I think it's quite interesting. So it's a way to try to bridge a gap between the space and the sphere of traditional collection, like an archival thing, and the way you are displaying that, the public. No, I think it's someone where we are observing several different approaches over the world, no? Different museums. That's one. The second issue is about politics. And maybe I'd love just to hear from Paola, because Paola, what you have done, it's from that point of view, I think it's amazing. We have every Friday, the Golden Boys of Fridays for Future coming here to visit Paola's exhibition, to talk to, well, to ask us to be the protagonist of several issues. So that's absolutely great and absolutely new. And I think it's really a window open on the future. So you don't know how much we thank you for that. Oh. So first thing is, do you think that this could become not simply a way in which cultural institutions live with politics, but the future possible way to do politics?
Politics is not only being for one party or the other, but it's about living together and dealing with urgent issues. And I have to say that Italy is much more familiar and easy with politics. In the United States, it's considered rude to talk politics at dinner table, right? While here,
sure.
Oh my God.
Are you sure?
Yeah, no, it's really funny. There's a certain taboo, right, Glenn?
Well, especially because we have a certain president, and you never know what people will think.
Yes, exactly.
Well, of course, in Italy, it's different.
It's a good competition, honestly, no? To compete.
I know. But so here, politics is very normal and familiar, and it's almost more inducive to do a overtly political exhibition here. But politics happens all the time. Also at MoMA, if you consider museums as places where people can gather and really talk and really listen to ideas, MoMA has had several subtle but extremely powerful and other not so subtle and even more powerful moments, like when Trump passed the immigration ban for seven Muslim countries in the span of like a few days. My colleagues had cleaned up some galleries and showed work from those 7 countries by artists that are in our collection right away. We have shown the rainbow flag, and actually it's been quite wonderful because it was a Friday afternoon in June a few years ago, and I didn't know what was going on, but all of a sudden I get a phone call from our Director of External Affairs, all in fibrillation, that wanted to show immediately the rainbow flag, and I didn't know what was going on, and I was thinking, what are you doing? Are you the curator now? And I didn't know. He was super moved because the Supreme Court had just declared, the legitimacy of gay marriage, right? So it was beautiful because right at that moment we were able to hang the flag, and it was captured, and it was quite important. And then there are many, many other cases, public programs. I know Glenn really loves public programs, and they always are very openly about politics, about diversity, about the openness of our national systems. We have started study groups that MoMA style go really in depth for 5 years at a time in different parts of the world to understand the other types of modernism that we haven't covered in the past. So I would say that yes, institutions have the very important role in society to allow people to have a space where they can see, hear, listen, smell, and talk politics.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think there's a myth in the United States that cultural institutions should be neutral and are in fact neutral spaces. But there is no such thing as a neutral space. Every time you make a decision about what you want to show and simultaneously what you're not showing, you've made a political decision. And every time you decide on an exhibition you want to display, you're also deciding about all the other exhibitions you're not displaying. And so those are profoundly political acts. And the stories you tell and the ways you tell those stories in the museum are profoundly political. And you don't have to have politics with a capital P to engage in the political. So we believe profoundly in freedom of expression, in open borders, in shared values, in the importance of debate and dissent. And so I think of those as humanistic values. Others think of them perhaps differently. But the very fact that our museum can be a place in which those values are experienced, contested, and debated, makes it both a more interesting place to visit, but also recognizes that it is a political act to put the institution together. Even if we don't declare that we're for these ideas and against those. You can be more subtle about it and still have a rich debate.
I mean, implicitly, in a way, but with a very clear direction. I mean, yeah.
Yes, and I think one of the things that, my takeaway from the 2016 election wasn't that what the president and his followers stand for are necessarily horrible and antithetical. I disagree with many of those positions. My takeaway was I hadn't heard them. I had been deaf to all those voices that had clearly been out there, that I, like so many of my colleagues and friends, lived in an echo chamber reified only by our own interests. My takeaway was that the museum had to be a place where both of these positions and others could be experienced, because otherwise we ran the risk of being as close-minded as the very people we were accusing of being narrow and close-minded. So it means the museum has to be a forum. If you believe in openness and dialogue and conversation and contradiction and debate and dissent, then you have to allow all of those values into the museum and recognize that there will be opposing positions that you might even be uncomfortable with, but they animate the experience of being there.
What about you, Stefano? You've also been in politics, and this institution is deeply political. What are your plans for the Triennale from this viewpoint?
No, I think it's for me it's a crucial issue, and I have not one answer. I think what an institution like Triennale should do is to develop together simultaneously different ways to deal with politics. What you have done is, I think, it's amazing, and also quite, let me say, unique, because the risk to fall down in a very literal and simplistic way to deal with politics is extreme when you touch an issue like climate change, for instance. So what I really appreciate in your exhibition is where you are using this, let me say, constructive perspective, climate change, but always with a very subtle, lateral way to touch the soul of the visitor and the people. So it's not saying, well, we are in a very dramatic condition and that's our solution. No, it's much more subtle and honestly much more efficient. And that's, I think, is an example of how we could go ahead trying to deal with contemporary and global issues like climate change, global warming, and so on and so on and so on. We are going to host on November a forum on forestry, which with FAO, and that's will be like a possible step forward. So we don't want to lose, if we will be able, and we hope to have you with us in order to continue this profile, this line, which is, in my opinion, extremely subtle and smart. Then there is another field which is about amnesia. So we are going to open in next year an art exhibition on Enzo Mari's work. Enzo Mari is a maestro, and probably is one of the last maestro of the, not only design, it's art, architecture, design, graphics, publishing. It's amazing. And he's a hero. He's a real hero. And we have asked Hans-Ulrich Obrist to do that. So he will curate this, trying to, gather around Enzo Mari's profile several visual artists, thinkers from all over the world. So, Hans has this obsession about amnesia. So what is probably if we could sum up what he has done the last 30 years, is, thanks to his interview, is to try to don't, let me say, to don't enter to the risk that amnesia could cancel the knowledge. So the project of a museum as a place where you are really taking care of the transmission of knowledge is also a project against amnesia. And that's, in a certain way, is what we'd love to do here, seriously. So that's a political action. And at the same time, I think all what we will try to do in order to make our collection capable to talk directly to the new generation, to not be simply a collection of past pieces, but someone which could be generative of new idea. So that's another possible way. Then there is a relation between cultural institution and cities. That's another possible, let me say, spheres of discussion. So cities are playing a very important role, probably much more than countries, states, and governments. Network of cities like C40 or 400 resilient cities that you know well are in the issue of climate change are absolutely at the center of the action. So I'm interested to know how you think to the future of possible relation between cultural institution and the city, which are so. That's for us is a very important point. So how we are developing a very strong relation with Milano, and how we are mirroring the present, I hope the future of Milano, how Milano could be mirrored in what we are trying to do, and how we are hosting inside the space of the Triennale, the urban centers, the Milano urban center, for instance. So that's another way to do politics now, I think.
How do you think? It's a different system in the United States, the politics and the city.
Yes, but I think there's a similarity to the outcome. So because so few of our cultural institutions ultimately are supported by city or state or even federal government, we operate independently and as private entities. But at the same time, we recognize that we play a critical role in the civic fabric of New York. And so even if we are private entities, we thrive because of the health of the city, and we recognize we have a role to play in ensuring that the city remains a vibrant space. And if you sort of sample why do people visit Paris or why do people visit New York, culture is always one of the primary reasons they visit. And when you sample why do corporations want their headquarters in places like London or New York, they want them there because the cultural infrastructure impacts quality of life, even if there are other factors that make living there difficult, traffic, cost of living, whatever. So we know we're part of some larger matrix of issues. And I actually think, especially in economies that are shifting, cultural institutions provide anchors that are important to the way in which people think about themselves, they think about their community, they think about their city, and the way cities understand themselves. We're lucky in New York that we have a city government that largely, not always, but largely understands that the cultural institutions of the city, the opera, the symphony, the museums, natural history, all play a role in making New York a better place. So we generally have very supportive city governments, even though their support is indirect. It's nonetheless beneficial. And so I believe that actually the more we collectively talk about our role as civic institutions, the better we understand the fabric of our cities. And so, we started a series of projects in the Department of Architecture and Design on critical, you could read, urgent issues in urban life, right? To try and understand what were the factors that were changing our city, whether it was questions of race, questions of climate change.
And we have on one slide of rising currents here.
Rising currents dealt with a question. What happens if the water in the harbor of New York rises by 6 inches or a foot? Well, you have a calamity, you have a disaster, and breaking news is going to rise. It's a way that, these exhibitions are speculative. They take the problem and try to imagine potential solutions and reactions, but they're actually part of a kind of acupuncture where we as a cultural institution can play a role in how the city might think about change. So we can be a catalyst for those conversations. So the relationship to the city is actually layered and complicated.
And Paola, do you have an idea about that? Or?
No, I completely agree in the sense that the big distinction that Glenn talked about, the fact that we're a private institution, that we're not publicly funded, makes it so that we can maintain some detachment, but at the same time, we're off the city. You know what I'm saying? We're in the city and off the city. Also, museums in a city like New York and all over the United States are the cathedrals and the squares. You know, just when tourists go to New York, the first thing they do is they go to the Museum of Modern Art. So we have a role that is not only local, but also global. You know, when there are Italian politicians that come to New York and say, could you tell us how to make our museums more efficient and more welcoming? I said, well, you just put dynamite and just tear down all the churches and all the squares in Italy, and then you're done. People will come to the museums. It's the place, you know. So I feel
love about Paola is she always has radical solutions.
It's like, so I completely agree. And you know, there are some mayors that we've had a tighter relationship with or more exchanges with, and others that instead have been less involved.
Yeah.
And then there's different commissioners. So it really changes like everything else. But mayors really have a lot of power and a lot of leeway. They can really show the way, and so can museums.
Great, thanks. So before maybe asking if there are gathering some questions, the public, so try to do that. I have one last issue, maybe if you have interest to talk about that. It's about technology and basically about how and if AI or augmented reality could seriously help you and us to improve the quality of our museums. How and if? Paola.
I can start by saying virtual reality is a disaster because people would bump into the art, so better not. Virtual reality, no. When it comes to photography, we have always welcomed photography without flash. I mean, not always, lately, because we have understood that that's the way for people to digest and metabolize art, and it would be so ridiculous to forbid it. I have to say, there are some legal issues when it comes to loan shows, but our collection, people can take pictures of without flash. Augmented reality, I have been trying to work with it. I just didn't have the time or the money in the end. I mean, it didn't work out, but augmented reality could be very helpful, especially when it comes to design or to information systems. When it comes to art, frankly, unless the artist herself includes it, I think it would be maybe an invasion. We'll see, but it's something to be decided. When it comes to information,
it's too strong,
and
that
it is just
quite difficult for visual art, for art to control the.
Yeah, I mean, usually when you show art, you show somebody's vision. So when you publish a photographer's work, you're not allowed to crop it, right, without the photographer's permission. Same way, overlaying over art information that, or just like visuals that are not legitimized by the art itself, I don't think it will work. I mean, unless it's an intervention by somebody else, you know what I'm saying? It has to be, I think, dealt with. What do you think, Glenn?
I think of it a little differently. I agree with you about virtual reality.
Yes.
Virtual reality, until virtual reality can be delivered seamlessly without complicated headsets, it's uninteresting to me, by and large. There are instances when I've seen it work. We did a project with Boris Kingelis, the great African sculptor, and we commissioned Karsten Höller to do a virtual reality tour of those villages that he creates out of paper, and that worked. But largely...
It's in itself an art piece, no?
Exactly.
So it's not a, yeah.
But I do think AI and augmented reality are going to become absolute tools of museum practice. They're in their infancy right now. They're still rather clunky and not particularly easy to
I love the
use.
fact I'm so much more conservative than you are.
But there's no doubt that we'll be using AI for everything, for trying to understand which works of art our visitors are looking at the most, and what is it that they need to know about them. And do we have the lighting right, and have we adjusted the climate conditions right, and how can we save money on energy, and how can we deliver information directly to people who want it. So AI is going to be everywhere and in everything, and I'm fine with that. Gosh, I always wanted to be able to speak fluent Italian, and pretty soon I'll do that. Boom, done. So it's going to be really helpful. But even more importantly, I think augmented reality is more interesting as a technology right now than virtual reality. And I think that we will learn how to use it intelligently with artists, but also independently of artists, to enhance the experience of being in the museum. So it isn't simply that it's about looking at a work of art. It may also be about transporting someone to a completely different place, right? So a work of art deals with climate change in the Sahara. Well, maybe augmented reality will take you as a viewer to what it feels like to be in the Sahara,
Star
right?
Trek.
So so look, when I started as Paola was the first curator at the Museum of Modern Art who was willing to use computers and the internet in exhibitions. And until Paola started doing that, it was... No, I remember it completely. It was 1995, 96.
Oh, that was also the website, yeah.
Nobody
I coded the first website.
Nobody was willing to do that.
Yeah.
So we're using computer as a design?
No, it was, I did the first website for MoMA. Literally did it because nobody knew what a website really was, so nobody knew how to do it. So I had a budget of $315 that I used to bring a PhD student out to dinner that would teach me HTML. So it's a horrible website, but it's still there. You can see it. I coded it with my own little hands.
So 1996, 1 out of 50 curators was willing to do this. And all the other curators not only thought Paola was crazy, they just weren't interested. They had zero interest. Today, 20 years later, every single exhibition has a website, right? It's normal. Boom, not a problem. So we adapt relatively slowly to new technologies, and then we realize, what were we doing without them? So I think it's going to be the same way with AI and AR.
Oh, AI, certainly. I completely agree.
Great. So I think we have wait for two free questions. I see there's some questions.
You have a microphone coming.
I would like just to know what was the idea that came in your mind when you decided to go online at that time?
The idea was archiving, so making sure that there was a record of the checklist of the exhibition, and also reaching more people and letting those who couldn't come to the museum know about the exhibition and also take a look at it. That was 95, so it was quite some time ago. But I have to say that idea of the archive is proving useful even today, because you can still find the checklist. And the Museum of Modern Art right now has put online material about all of its exhibitions since 1929, which is incredible. People really thank us, and it's our archive and Michelle Elligot and then the digital department. But if you go to the MoMA website, you can find Architecture Without Architects, the press release, the checklist. You can find information about every single exhibition.
Thanks. Please.
I was thinking again about the title of this panel, so Cultural Institution as the R&D of Society. And this title made me think about the amount of money that governments pump into science and technology. Of course, some countries more, some countries less. But each year some money are invested into science and technology. with the explicit aim of supporting innovation. And this is because probably we have a clear definition of what scientific and technological R&D innovation means. And this makes it easy for citizens to strengthen their case for public R&D fundings. On the other hand, we have no equivalent understanding of innovation in the arts and in the creative field. And so we don't know how to measure how much arts organizations invest in innovation, and we don't have any way of estimating in return the investment, which is a likely explanation of why governments have not targeted more money into it. And so my question is, what is the way out of the stumbling block, out of this situation?
Glenn, I don't know if you have the answer. It's quite complicated. And
Vote for people who want to spend more money on culture.
Yeah, that's a good.
It's the only way out. I mean, government is the result of what individual politicians are committed to, and when enough people are committed to a certain direction, then there's change. I couldn't agree with you more. You want to fund science and technology, but to my mind, culture is equally important. And so even if it's less clear what culture is, it's quite obvious that there are areas that you can fund and that will stimulate creativity. I'd say that coming from a country that doesn't have a Ministry of Culture, that doesn't believe that government even has a role in culture, right? The American belief is that culture belongs to individuals, not to the collective, and therefore government shouldn't be involved in the support of culture. I happen to disagree. I happen to think that if you live in a world that believes that health, science, technology, welfare, housing, defense are all part of government responsibility, it seems inconceivable that you wouldn't believe that culture was also a responsibility. But the American story is a complicated one.
So, thank you so much, Glenn. Thank you so much, Paola.
Thank
it was
you,
really
Stefano.
great. We had
Thank you all.
so many other possible issues. Just to remember, one, it's about the balance between entertainment and play. I think that's another issue we'd love to develop, maybe in the future together. So we should think to our space like space for playgrounds, for playing. So to make play as a kind of serious approach to the museum. Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.